All right, we've been very spoiled this year so far for some really great progressive rock music, and let's just keep this train going and talk about another release that's kind of a glutton for punishment in terms of the amount of music, the amount of virtuosity, and yeah, the amount of scope and scale. So let's dive into it. Motorpsycho with their self-titled album. So, Motorpsycho, for anybody that's not initiative of them already, is a Norwegian progressive rock band, if that term can be applied to these guys. Definitely more of like the eclectic side of things. Getting their start in like the late 80s, early 90s, like these guys were on the scene pretty early on. And I believe their first record was Lobotomizer in 91. They reached a little bit of acclaim with Timothy's Monster in 94, and then again, putting out a bunch of albums and having, I believe you pronounce it, Phanerothymie, back in 2001. But for me, it was the Death-Defying Unicorn that dropped in 2012 that launched these guys into the stratosphere in terms of the progressive rock, in terms of, crafting these very complex, very dense, very jazzy, more eclectic style of the prog sphere. These guys weren't the retro progs. They weren't doing, the Yes and the Genesis callbacks, but they were always doing something new, something exciting, always within more of the hard rock, jazz rock kind of style and playing field. And since the Death-Defying Unicorn, I feel like the album that they released just prior to that of Heavy Metal Fruit, ending with one of my favorite epics of all time, of Gelliby's Travels, parts 1 through 4, really solidified my love for this band, and I was always excited for something new from them. And they provided, every album since then have had moments of pure brilliance, and moments where I feel like the heavens open up and the angels come down, right from Still Life with Eggplant, Behind the Sun, Here Be Monsters, The Tower, The Crucible, and I feel like a lot of this, once again, culminated into the All Is One that was released in 2020. The All Is One might be my second favorite album from them, just after the Death-Defying Unicorn. But I feel like since the All Is One, the band has kind of floundered a little bit, and their last handful of releases, starting with Kingdom of Oblivion in 21, Ancient Astronauts in 22, Yay from 23, and Nay from 24, it sees the band trying new things without too much innovation or success. Like, the Kingdom of Oblivion was a little bit of a mess. The Ancient Astronauts was them attempting to kind of go back to form, and it not quite sticking the landing in the same way that, say, like the Tower of the Crucible did. And then Yay and Nay were fine, but I feel like Yay was them doing like this acoustic set, and I kind of need to be in the proper mindset for that, and that's not why I go to Motorpsycho. And Nay, I think I listened to once when it dropped, and I haven't even really returned to it since then. So, all that being a preamble, let's talk about their self-titled release, which comes at us on their 35th studio record, if I'm counting properly. And they decided to go with being self-titled. And I always kind of get my back up a little bit when a band decides to go to a self-titled, because are we going to go for an Ekelin where it's a complete masterpiece? Are we going to go to a Dream Theater where it's the worst album they've ever put out? Or are we going to go to a Genesis where it's just kind of fine? So, yeah, let's talk about this. First off of the gate, I want to say that, like, up to this point, it's been a trio of the three musicians, with Brent Sather on lead vocals and bass, Hans Magnus as the lead guitars and backing vocals, and then Thomas I'm so sorry, Thomas, as drums and percussion. And this is the first record where it's a duo. It's just Brent and Hans. Unfortunately, it looks like Thomas didn't make the cut for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why. So a lot of the percussion, a lot of the rhythm styles is being provided by other individuals. We have Olaf Elson on a couple of tracks, and Englad Vastbob, I believe, on the rest and the remaining. These two individuals do an okay job, but let's get to the criticisms that I have of this album first before I get into what I love about this record. The criticisms are that lifeblood, that drive, that really aggressive style, and that sharp edge that I loved from the Death-Defying Unicorn, as well as the whole Hell suite that they were doing between those albums. It's kind of lost without Thomas's presence. That aggressiveness, that oomph, that it's kind of lacking on this album, and a lot of these tracks really do crave and command that essence, that drive, and it feels a little flat. Another aspect of this album that I feel is a little bit lacking are within the longer stretches of tracks on here. You know, there's about 3 tracks that are a little bit longer in length with one 20-minute epic. I feel like those bigger tracks where normally Motorpsycho is so good cultivating and crafting these massive climbs, these grand crescendos. And we found that with half the tracks off of the All Is One, half the tracks, once again, on the Death-Defying Unicorn, as well as Gulliby's Travels. I know that they're masters of creating these massive climbs with extremely beautiful payoffs. And I feel like those tracks on this album don't quite earn their keep. I feel like they're a lot more of wandering the landscape, seeing what's there without it really culminating into anything exciting or anything worthy of the track to be the lengths that they are. The other thing is the structure of this album feels a little out of place and a little odd. Now, dividing it into 2 and having disc 1 and disc 2, I think is a better way to sit down and listen to it. But there's 81 minutes worth of music, which could take up a single disc in the same way that Ekelund's self-titled album divided itself. And I feel like where Ekelund's album excels at having that very clear, distinct, midpoint, this album wavers a little bit. You have the first disc that has the first 7 songs, and then the second disc that has the remaining 4. And it starts off the second disc with the big 21-minute epic. And when you listen to it in succession of, without a break, it does feel a little much. It feels like there's a little too much to chew in the mouth. And it brings my enjoyment level down slightly because, once again, we're not really building to anything grand or big or that kind of stay power. Now, that being said, let's move a little bit more into the positives and the things that I really do enjoy of this album. Both Brent and Hans are doing a fantastic job of carrying the album and the band as a duet, a duo. That aggressiveness, that power styles, they're still found here. I feel like Hans is picking up a lot more of the duties on this record, especially within the more electronical side of things. So on the Mellotron, within the keyboards, the synths, and things along those lines. And I think he's also stretching his legs within the harmonizations as well. His lead and backing vocals are doing a lot more work on this record, and it provides a little bit more of a stay power within his presence. Brent is also doing a great job on being a lot more on the piano side and the synth side as well. You feel like both of these guys are really trading instruments back and forth so that no one is really being the full-time guitarist or the full-time bass player or the full-time keyboardist, to a point where those kind of structures and signatures that I'm used to hearing on a Motorpsycho album is kind of lost within the weeds in a very good way. It's kind of like, squeezing the juice down to the very essence on here. I also like some of the smaller tracks. In fact, this is one of the few times where I feel like the smaller tracks are actually some of the better tracks on here. Like, I like the 1-2 punch of Stanley's Tonight's the Night and The Comeback, both of which are about, 4 minutes or so. And it kind of has that throwback 70s rock style. I'm getting flavors of Rush and Led Zeppelin and, that kind of fun rock that we got way back when. And I really enjoy that kind of groove and that kind of get up and go. This was some of the more single-y moments that I was really craving from, say, a Yay or a Nay. And it just kind of felt a little... I also really do enjoy the 1-2 punch of Lucifer, Bringer of Light, and Balthazar. Both of these tracks are just over 10 minutes long. Lucifer being the opening track, Balthazar being kind of the closing track off of the first disc. I know Bed of Roses is the actual official ending track, but both of these do command quite a bit of stay power. Once again, I wish that they kind of grew to somewhere really interesting, but the time that I'm spent in there, it allows the boys to stretch their legs and kind of be that jazz piece that they were when they were playing with like the Jaga Jazz kind of styles. There's kind of that stay power on there. There's that fun aspect on there, as well as the 3 Frightened Monkeys, the 8-minute penultimate track. And the 3 Frightened Monkeys might be my favorite track off of this album. Again, it's about 8, almost 9 minutes long, and where this track goes is very fun, it's very punchy. It reminds me why I came to Motorpsycho in the first place. It's driven, it's got that really aggressive kind of almost on a runaway train kind of an aspect of it. It's reminding me of some of the harsher pieces off of Eggplant or Still Life and Eggplant, as well as Here Be Monsters. You know, that drive, that really powerful rock music that I feel like we've kind of gotten away from within the past 2 decades or so. You know, I feel like when we come to rock, it's either going straight into the metal or we're going more into the electronical side. And so when we get back to our roots within the Three Frightened Monkeys, I'm a lot more excited about that. Now let's talk about the big epic of Neotar. Neozar is fine, but for a 21-minute track, I was really hoping for that grand crescendo at the end. You know, like I enjoy that the first, 8 minutes or so follow suit with a lot of the tracks that we've had up to this point as well. And then it kind of dips. And then I love that little experimentation that they have on there. It reminds me of some of the more quirky aspects within the Death-Defying Unicorn. But when we get into that big climb and that big, starting to put the pieces back together, it culminates into something that I'm just kind of lackluster for. And that's kind of where I'm like, oh man, beans. I was really hoping for that big oomph, which unfortunately leads me to my final statement on here, is that because of the length of this record, unlike other albums that have this length and have this variety, and I'm looking outside of the prog sphere, I'm thinking of Omnium Gatherum from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I'm thinking of more challenging records of like To Be Kind from Swans, where you have this big, epic, long, grueling, over an hour worth of music. There's payoffs, there's buildups and payoffs, there's varieties, there's, they're trying new things, they're experimenting, there's a lot of, variations. And I feel like within the length of this and the tracks on here, some of the smaller tracks like Lard of Heimly, Skip Sadie, Bed of Roses, and Dead of Winter, I feel like these smaller intimate tracks kind of get lost in the fold, which is a shame because there's moments of real beauty on these smaller moments and on these smaller tracks. So yeah, I think in the end, here's what I'll say about Motorpsycho's self-titled album. It's definitely a little bit more of a mixed grab bag from a band that can usually handle a mixed grab bag. I feel like the structure, the length, weigh this album down in a little bit more of a negative that overshadows some of the more brighter moments of this album. I feel like the loss of Hans on here can be felt in a little bit more of a negative, and I feel like even though they got a number of, guest musicians to help fill out the shoes, it's just a little too late in that case. There are still moments of beauty that can be found on this record, and I do feel as if this is the best album that we've gotten from them since the All Is One, but not necessarily by a very large leap, Like, I would feel like this is just a little bit better than the Ancient Astronauts that we got from 2022, but it's definitely better than the Kingdom of Oblivion, yay or nay. So, that all being said, it's still kind of nowhere near as close as that big album run that we got from the Death-Defying Unicorn or even Heavy Metal Fruit, all the way to the All Is One. Like, all those records that are kind of in that 10-year span, I feel is still cream of the crop, and this album is just below those. So, yeah, I think my final rating for this album is Motorpsycho by Motorcycle is an album that I would ultimately download. One thing I do have to remind myself is that these guys have been going since the late 80s, early 90s. So they're getting into their 60s and 70s. So the fact that they're still able to put out some really fun, really bombastic, and really invigorating music is a testament. Like a lot of musicians and bands at this point are either slowing down or, starting to put up their shoes or working themselves into a very comfortable corner. At least with Motorpsycho, they're always trying something new. They're always very invigorative, and they're always like going back to their roots of being that classic rock with a lot of experimentation. So can't fault them for that. But that's my take on Motorpsycho's self-titled work. What did you guys think about this record? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you for today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.